friends. Well, this is about what has finally happened, or at least as of when I left my house, it was about to happen. After many threatened cliffs, as they called them, over the past months, the deadline appears to have passed, after which a 10% cut in federal government spending on most so-called discretionary budget items will go into effect. Obama has until midnight to sign the order for such cuts, but it appears unlikely, according to all reports, that there will be any last-minute compromise between the administration and the Republicans. Now, in our advanced advertising for this talk before this had happened, we called it a budget heist, asserting that both parties have colluded to rob the workers' money. Yet it appears, if you listen to what President Obama said today, that the Republicans alone are guilty of forcing this so-called sequestration that will now lead to big cuts in so many areas of the budget. And of course it is true that the Republicans have consistently opposed bringing in more revenue to the government by raising taxes on the rich. I don't know of any opinion polls out on this yet, but I think that most workers and oppressed people will be against the cuts, and they will blame the Republicans for them. So what has happened will be seen as a defeat for the Democrats, but also as a political victory for them in this sense, that the Republican Party will be blamed, presumably, will be blamed, and presumably will lose votes because of it in the next election, which, of course, remains to be seen. In any event, it is definitely a huge setback for the millions of people who are going to be affected by these cuts, which includes federal workers in a whole variety of departments, and the millions of people who depend on federally funded programs of all sorts. For example, ABC News reports today that, and I quote, federal agencies, including Homeland Security, the Pentagon, Internal Revenue Service, and the Department of Education, you know, they lump them all together, the repressive agencies of the state, along with something like education, which everybody needs. It says they have all prepared to notify employees that they will have to take one unpaid day off per week through the end of the year, which amounts to a 20% pay cut for these workers. 20%. The Economist of today says that, quote, the initial installment of the sequestering is a cut of $85 billion for the 7 months until the end of September. Most entitlements, such as pensions and health care, Social Security, that is, and Medicare, are excluded, which makes the reduction in the rest more severe. 13% in defense spending for the next 7 months, and a 9% cut to other domestic discretionary programs. This is continuing to quote from them. The cuts will come primarily through reduced grants, such as for Head Start, an anti-poverty program for preschoolers, and staff furloughs, meaning unpaid days off. Since the government must give at least 30 days notice of furloughs, and most agencies have not yet done so, the public may see no impact until April. With luck, the sequester may have been unpicked by then, but that's not certain at all. Now, that's my comment. Now, by the way, the $85 billion that they talk about in this article is described as only the initial installment, because the sequester mandate is, quote, designed to slice $1.2 trillion from spending over a decade. So, this is only the beginning. But where did the sequestration order come from? And this is where I get back to our initial way of presenting this, the collusion of both capitalist parties. Again, a quote. Mr. Obama and the Republicans agreed to the sequester in 2011 purely as a spur to negotiate a more rational plan for reducing the deficit. That's again a quote from the source above. So there you have it. Both parties agreed to the sequester more than a year ago. It was bipartisan, as they call it. But the general understanding is that the Democrats thought the Republicans would prefer to compromise rather than let it happen. Well, it seems they were wrong. Why did they think the Republicans would compromise? Perhaps because this will affect the budgets of the Pentagon and other repressive organs of the state that they love so well. But you know, neither party wants to be seen as weakening the grip of U.S. imperialism, either abroad or at home. In his speech today, Obama stressed that, quote, both sides need to compromise. He called these cuts dumb, that's the word he used, because they'll hurt, as he said, business and the economy. In other words, he wasn't talking to the people who are going to lose their jobs or are going to lose their benefits or the programs that they need to survive. He was talking to the capitalists who give so much money to the Republicans and telling them that they're shooting themselves in the foot for allowing this to happen. It's going to hurt them. He added that the pain will be real. That was his, sort of aside to the people, that your pain is going to be real. But he really didn't talk much about the workers and the poor who depend on government assistance for their very survival. Instead, he emphasized that the sequester will hit areas related to military spending and will create, as in his words, a ripple effect throughout the economy. Now, by the way, I don't usually check out the stock markets since I don't have any interest in them. But Wall Street seemed to negate this argument of Obama's by taking the cuts in stride. All the markets, the S&P 500, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and the NASDAQ ended today up by quite a few points. The big investors do not see this as bringing down the economy. And by the economy, they don't mean people's livelihood, people's jobs, people's services. They mean their profits. Now, why is this? Why is it that the two parties have come to this point where these cuts are going to go through, and they could affect the repressive organs of the state? Well, it's for this reason. More than anything else, the big banks that dominate the economy want to be sure that they can continue to rake in the fabulous interest payments that they receive every year on the national debt. Now, here's an interesting statistics. Interest on the debt hit a record in fiscal year 2011, reaching $454 billion. That's almost $500 billion. Interest on the debt came down a little bit last year because of lower interest rates in general, but it's expected to become the fourth largest budget item by 2021, which isn't that far off. Now, this is really the crux of the matter right now. Of course, the military-industrial complex always wants a bigger military budget, even though they can already blow up the world several times over with what they have. And both parties are in cahoots with imperialism's need to expand its influence and control all over the globe. But the Republicans, by refusing to a compromise on the budget for now, enforcing the cuts in federal spending, are doing what the big banks want. This isn't just what the far right wing of the Republican Party, the Tea Party people and all, it isn't just what they want. It's what the big banks want. And they're not afraid of being charged with being anti-Pentagon either. Right now, the budget for the Pentagon, the VA, military pensions, and other war-related expenses comes to more than half of all discretionary funding. Clearly, if the government is going to save any money, that budget has to be cut. In addition, they will probably find ways to restore a lot of the military cuts in one way or another. They have ways of doing that. And even Pentagon generals have signaled that they want to reduce spending on some big-ticket items. Now listen to this. This is an extraordinary statement by Lieutenant General Christopher Bogdan of the U.S. Air Force. He's been in Australia this week trying to persuade the Australian government to stick to a plan, I think made by an earlier administration, to buy 100 fighter planes from the United States. The Lockheed F-35 made by Lockheed Martin. Here's what he said. He said, he said this publicly, while he was there, this general, "What I see Lockheed Martin and Pratt & Whitney doing today is behaving as if they're getting ready to sell me the very last F-35 and the very last engine, and they're trying to squeeze every nickel of that last F-35 and that last engine." Now, the F-35, which he's trying to get them to buy, and which they don't want to buy because it's so expensive, not 100 of them, is the Pentagon's most expensive weapons program ever. I wrote about this, by the way, a couple weeks ago in the article about the drones. It would cost $396 billion just for this type of plane if the Pentagon sticks to its plan to build 2,456 jets by the late 2030s. 2030 sounds far off, but it's really about 13, 14 years from now. It seems from what this general said that he's having a hard sell getting the Australian government to buy these expensive planes. Meanwhile, the military is finding that drones are a lot cheaper and can do a lot of what the fighters do. By the way, the CEO of Lockheed Martin got paid $25 million in 2012. That was his compensation for his hard labors, $25 million. Multiply that by all the top officers of all the firms that get military and homeland security contracts, and you're talking real money.